equaled and probably never to be got up to the proper level. Livestream No Frills podcast. I am your host, Pete the Tech Guy, half Fedora Doctor Who scarf, and back to the season 12 scarf. Will travel, or actually will not travel, as instead of being on the radio as the Tech Guy was for years in syndication and locally out of Worcester on a 50,000 watt station, I am now off the radio and live streaming this podcast for you. Hope you enjoy it. Just an FYI, I generally don't have time to answer comments. So a little bit of housekeeping. I don't have time to answer comments in the comment box during the podcast. Sometimes there's just too many of them. So until then, let me get this light. That's kind of glare in the background. So until then, I put the links to the various posts and things I'm going to be discussing so that you can check them out in chat. Feel free to engage in chat. I really won't be able to answer in chat. If you like what you see, feel free to say so. If you hate what you hear, feel free to say so too. Either way, you have a right to your opinion. And I'm very glad that you decided to stop by and join us. We had our busiest week ever last week. Hopefully we'll reach that point this week, although I'm not, guaranteed this. But I'm glad to have you for whatever amount of time you decide to join us for. Well, today's topic, as you might guess, in fact, all of today's topics have to do with George Floyd and the protests and everything else that's been going on the last 10 days over it. We're not even going to be able to get to the Trump economy, which has just taken another upswing, which is going to upset people tremendously. But anyways, let's get started. Now, the post I want to talk about now, to begin with, is we're seeing all sorts of things from the left and from the media, so bad that I am literally shocked that they're willing to say some of these things. And what I'm even more shocked about is that so many people are willing to go along with it without question. This is scary. This is ridiculous. And I can't believe that people are playing along with this. I cannot believe that people are playing along with this without questioning it. And I, especially as a Sicilian, there's certain parts that I find particularly hilarious. And I'm going to get to that immediately because I want to go over the 4 questions. Because again, nobody's questioning these people. Nobody is saying, does this make sense? Is this the right thing? Is this a smart way of doing things? And is this consistent with what you've been telling us, what you've been insisting from us? And through that, I came up with 4 questions that I think the Democrats, the media, and Black Lives Matter should answer before anybody jumps on their bandwagon. And I think polls and companies and such should ask these questions. The fact that they're not is something, and why they're not, I'm going to talk about a little bit later. That'll be the last topic today. But these are all things that need to be talked about. But here's question 1. Now, one of the things I've noticed online is that a lot of people have had no problem busting the police. In fact, when I tweeted out, there were people tweeting out, oh, this person, victim of police violence. I tweeted out about the deaths of 6 different police officers. Now, in one of my tweets, I said murder. They weren't all murders. And I corrected that. In the later tweet. I don't delete tweets if I'm wrong. I rather reply to them, because if you delete them and you don't do it within 30 seconds, then there's like a series of replies that have no original tweet. I rather just say, all right, I screwed up. Let the whole thread stand. Plus, there's no point in deleting a tweet, because if you delete it and you're wrong, someone's going to screen scrap it and say, aha, he tried to hide it. Better to just leave it there. And in the end, it's Twitter. Who cares? So, anyways, so I tweet out this list of things and say, oh, feel free to ignore this. And I had people tweeting back saying, happy to do it. Will do. Like, we will ignore these police deaths because they don't matter. Those lives didn't matter. Well, anyways, one of the reasons why so many Black Americans seem to be really hyped up about this is the idea of racial profiling. There's this racial profiling, or people are making conclusions about Black Americans, and it's the police that are doing it even worse. Police are making these conclusions about Black Americans. and are profiling it. They are treating all police, all black people, as if they're the same. And even worse, the protesters, where we've had looting, where we've had the burning. I mean, it used to be, you'd think of the Macy's store in New York, you'd think of Miracle on 34th Street. Now it's not quite a miracle what went on there this week. But anyways, if you suggest that these protests are riots and that there's arson and so forth, you are defaming all of these wonderful protesters who are showing up and doing their patriotic duty and exercising their constitutional rights to protest. So because of this, I have this question. Question number one. Why does the Democrat/left/Black Lives Matter think it's okay to lump in all police with a bad cop in Minneapolis, but objects to lumping in all protesters with rioters, looters, and arsonists? Now, it would seem to me, if we are not supposed to profile criminals, and remember, people of color commit crimes all out of proportion to their population. Now, that doesn't mean that you should look at any individual person of color or any individual black person or whatever as if they're a crook, because they're not the person who did it. You can't assume that because of someone's color. I mean, if you have probable cause, you're saying, okay, there's a suspect in this area. This is the description. That might be a different story. But you shouldn't just profile people without cause, without actual cause. But yet, police all over the country are being profiled today. In fact, I believe as I speak here, there's a march going on in Leominster, Massachusetts, which is the city next to mine. There was a march here in Fitchburg 2 days ago. Now, we are 1,000 miles from Minneapolis. Our police have nothing to do with Minneapolis, yet people are marching here. How is that not saying, your police are corrupt? And the irony, of course, is that we had 2 people of color die in this area. One was hit by a drive-by less than a mile from where I'm sitting right now, and the other was found in the Nashua River. And yet they're going to march about something a bad cop did 1,000 miles away. How is that not profile? Why is it okay to lump all police in with this bad cop, but if you lump the protesters with the rioters, that's bad. If you lump people of color with the increased amount of crime done by that, that's bad. Why is one all right and not the other? Now, I would submit and suggest it's all wrong. You have to look at people as individuals, and unless you have probable cause or an actual reason to be suspicious of someone, don't treat a person differently. That's very simple. But that's a question. And remember, and the left keeps telling us, you can't be using labels. Well, how is this not using labels on police? And I think that question really needs to be answered. I'm going to repeat it again. Why does the Democrat left, Black Lives Matter, think it's okay to lump all police in with a bad cop in Minneapolis, but objects to lumping in all protesters in with rioters, looters, and arsonists? That's a great question. I think we deserve a great answer to that. Now, here's my second question. Now, for many years, we have been told that you can't get guns are too easy to get. We've had people exaggerate saying it's easier to get cough medicine than guns. It's a lie. Easier to do all these different things than a gun. Generally a lie. But we've been hearing this for a long time. Guns should be the Second Amendment says a well-regulated admission. Guns should be in the hands of authority. Now, the police are the authority. So how is it, question number 2, how is it that the Democrats left media insist that guns can only be trusted in the hands of the police and government, when they also insist those same police cannot be trusted to use force? Remember, we now have the spectacle of the left profiling police, saying all these police all over the place. It does not matter that this one cop, and you can, in fairness, you can include the other cops who let things go by, who were there. You can criticize them too. That's legitimate in my opinion. Of course, you might have a different opinion, but you're entitled to your opinion too. How is it that you say we cannot trust American citizens with their guns, but you're going to trust them to the police, who you say cannot be trusted. We've been sold this thing about our guns for years, and let's point out a contradiction here. Just a month ago, you had armed protesters protesting the reopenings. You had, in fact, 2 months ago, we had armed protesters protesting new gun laws in Virginia, but just before the COVID-19 stuff. We had the media was all outraged. This was going to cause death, destruction, plus all those armed people. They were going to be terrible. It was going to be horrible. All these bad things were going to happen. There were no riots. There were no casualties. There was no shootings. There was no nothing. None of that happened. Yet, the police that we supposedly are now being told we have to all criticize these police. We have to all tar these police. All these police must be considered the enemy. They can be trusted with guns and the citizens can't? This would seem like a contradiction to me. And maybe I'm just ignorant. And you feel free, if you think I am ignorant, to give me the down arrow over here. Or if you like what I'm saying, please give me the thumbs up or subscribe to the podcast. But it seems to me a little odd that on one hand, police cannot be trusted, but they should be the only ones with guns. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a question that our friends at Black Lives Matter and so forth should be made to answer. It's a good question. And I think it's a question our Democrat media Black Lives Matter friends should answer. Question 3. Right now, the big Twitter trend is defund the police. Take away the money from the police. In fact, in Minneapolis, you actually have people saying abolish the police department. And now this is a question that not only should be asked to the Democrat media left, but if I have the time, or if one of you have the time, you should call up and email a good blogger or Pajamas Media or someone should contact every member of Congress and ask them this question. And if they believe with this defund the police, because here's my question. If the Democrat left Black Lives Matter believe there should be no police, then who should enforce the law? What happens with a person assaults or robs or murders someone? Who will they go to protection? Will it be the gangs? Because, once you get the police out of gang areas, the gangs become the law. And the cartels, foreign cartels, control that area. That becomes their actual territory. They decide who lives and dies. The army, are we going to send the army in? But we can't send the army in because that's the army going after Americans that everyone's talked about how horrible it is. Well, there's no police. The mafia. Now, this is something I've been joking about online for the last day since this has come up because I'm Sicilian American. If I was a mafia don and I saw what's going on here in Minneapolis, the idea of getting rid of the police, and not just the funding them in Minneapolis, they want to get rid of the police. I would immediately move into the area. I would start visiting businesses. I would send a representative to the business and say, I understand the police are going to be leaving your area. I have an offer. We will protect your business from thugs. We want a weekly fee or monthly and a small percentage of your take. Let's say 2%. We won't be greedy. I mean, because mafia would normally take a bigger percentage, but now you're covering a city. You got a bigger base of income to come from. And now these businesses are paying you to take care of the thugs. And unlike when the police would take care of the thugs and arrest them and read them their rights, you will find that if the mafia takes over, these thugs will not come back. You'll also find that the local hardware stores that open will have the shovels and the lime in front when you first walk in. So, and even better for the mafia if they move in to take over the functions of the police, not only will they get the money from all the businesses they're protecting now, but whenever they rob one of these thugs is a drug dealer or something, they can rob them. They can take their money. They can take their drug money. And not only so you get the money from the thugs that you're robbing, you get the money from the businesses that you're doing, and because the businesses will find that there's no repeat business from those thugs, Because remember, shovels and lime. This is not, mafia is now taking over because there's no police. Your hardware stores now have the shovels and lime and plastic in the front. Suddenly, you're going to find business owners saying, hey, this thug never came back. I like this. Suddenly, your mafia is popular. Suddenly, the mafia people are looking at Don whoever. If I went and did it myself, I'd be Don Pietro. Don Pietro, thank you for protecting us. Is the mafia going to do it? Are you going to have private organizations of citizens? And this is what I really laugh at, because the Democrats used to have a system like this. They had a private organization of citizens. And of course, that private organization of citizens to enforce the laws that the military authorities at the time you had a military occupation under the Reconstruction, they would wear white to differentiate themselves from the military. And of course, because they must have had coronavirus at the same time too, they would all wear masks. That's the basically that's the Ku Klux Klan. Or will they be expected to defend themselves, but of course without guns, because we've already established citizens cannot have guns. So who's going to enforce these laws? You don't have police. You don't have, because I'm going to explain something about police. And this is going to sound a little odd. Police have two functions. And both of them, and the primary function of police is to do violence on our behalf. And I know that sounds odd when I say it, but I'm talking about physical violence. When you physically restrain someone, that's violence. The police's job is to do what I don't have to do it, so I don't have to. I don't have to worry about a thug every time because I can call the police. I am not expected to be there to shoot a robber myself because I have the police. The police's job is to serve and protect. That's their first job, to serve and protect the citizen. But the second job of the police is to serve and protect the criminal, which is actually why George Floyd's murder is wrong, because they restrained him and ended up killing him. They did not. The police's job is to keep a guy like me, angry about being robbed, from going over and blowing that guy's head off. Or, as people in the South might have heard, the Black Lives Matter people might have heard, to keep someone from going to a jail cell and stringing them up. That's what police do. Police protect someone accused until they can be given a punishment by law or set free if they're found innocent, and protect people from those people that they've arrested. That's the function of police. So who's going to do that function? Again, what happens if a person assaults, robs, or murders someone? Who do they go for protection? Gangs, the army, the mafia, who, if they're smart, jump right in, private organizations of citizens, or will they be expected to defend themselves? Now, I have no trouble with people defending themselves. I have no trouble with the Second Amendment. I think people should arm themselves. In fact, does this mean if we're going to get rid of police and we're going to get rid of guns from citizens, that means we must be arming teachers now? Because obviously, if there's no police, if there's a shooting situation in a school, we don't have to worry about them not coming in because they don't exist. So you're going to have to give teachers guns, because there's no good guy with a gun anymore. So you have to give it to a teacher, and you better be sure that teacher's stable, by the way. So that's question number 3. Now, question number 4. We have seen the spectacle of people saying that all lives matter is beyond the pale. We had a broadcaster who'd been broadcasting the Sacramento Kings games for 30 years, who was asking what he thought of Black Lives Matter. He said, all lives matter. He was fired for it. Now, since all lives matter is beyond the pale, and blacks consist of only 10% of the U.S. population, which is about 330 million, so that leaves about 300 million people. Perhaps they can tell us, do Hispanic lives matter? Do Jewish lives matter? Do Arab lives matter? Do Oriental lives matter? Do white lives matter? I mean, I'd like to ask these corporations before I give them my business, does my life matter? Does my family's life matter? Do the lives of my wife and children matter? Because if that company is willing to say Black lives matter, but isn't willing to say that my wife and children's lives matter, then obviously my money doesn't matter either. And if my money doesn't matter to them, and I want to compliment someone in comments who just asked that I should include unborn lives matter. I as a given count unborn lives as lives. I don't think that has to be expressed explicitly, because there's the two biggest killers of Black Americans in the country are other Black Americans and abortion right now. If you are a Black person under 20 or under 25, the two most likely things to kill you is another Black person or abortion, which is pretty sad. And I think it's disgusting. I think it's a direct result of the Great Society, because the Black family used to be strong. Remember, this did not used to be the case in the Black community. The Black community was one of the strongest family-oriented groups there ever was, and they had to be, because they had to fight Jim Crow. They had to get through the civil rights movement. If the Black community was in the state it was in today, in 1930, Jim Crow would still be going on. No question. Because there is, the Black family's been beaten up on. But again, whose lives matter now? Can these people in the Democrat Party, in Black Lives Matter, in the media, tell me, do Hispanic lives matter? Do Asian lives matter? Do the other 90% of lives matter? Now, the truth is, of course, the reason why Black lives matter, because no one will say, why do Black lives matter? Well, Black lives matter because all lives matter. What happened to George Floyd is not outrageous because he was a Black man killed by police who used excessive force, who are now charged with murder, but because he was a man killed by police who used excessive force and who are now charged with murder. It's his humanity that matters, not his race. It's outrageous because a man should not be treated like that. Not a Black man shouldn't be treated like that. No man should be treated like that. Would it have been all right if it was an Oriental man? Would have been all right if it was a Hispanic man? Would have been all right if it was an Arab man? Would have been all right if it was a white man? And that brings me to the second topic, because if it was a white man, you wouldn't have heard of him. If George Floyd was white, you would have never heard of him. And why would you never have heard of him? Well, the reason you never would have heard of him is topic number 2. It's also the reason why I blame the media for all of these riots. I blame the media for all of these deaths. I blame the media for all that has happened here as the instigators. Now, in fairness, the individual people who did these crimes are the ones guilty. The ones that the Democrat attorney generals have been releasing, because, God forbid you hold a rioter. I mean, you need that jail space open for somebody who cuts hair or opens a restaurant or goes to a beach. But why should these people be blamed? Well, if you've come here before, you probably know the answer to why. And the answer why is the Tech Guy's Laws of Media Outrage. Now, I a long time ago wrote the Tech Guy's Laws of Media Outrage to describe how the media will react in any situation. Using the Tech Guy's Laws of Media Outrage, you can predict how the media will act or react at any given moment. And I recently listed how they play in the Tara Reade case. Now I want to tell you how they play here in this George Floyd situation. Now, I'm not going to do the various laws of media outrage in order. I'm going to do them in the order that they apply the most. Now, one of the distinguishing features of the Tech Guy's Laws of Media Outrage is how they so readily apply to the situations going on in the news right now. It's an excellent way to check things out. The current riots that are taking place in generally democratic cities are an excellent example. To wit, the Tech Guy's third law of media outrage states that mainstream media's elevation and continued classification of any story as nationally newsworthy rather than of only local interest is in direct correlation to said story's current ability to affirm any current Democrat liberal media meme or talking point, particularly on the subject of race or sexuality. If George Floyd was white, the media would have considered it a local story. If George Floyd had been killed by someone of a different race, if it had been a black cop, might not have been a national story. But because the media will promote the killing of a black man by a white person in order to affirm, this is racism, America is racist. The many black men who are murdered daily in places like Baltimore, in places like Chicago. I actually had a Democrat activist saying, you guys always bring up Chicago and Baltimore. Well, yeah, because you don't give a damn about those black lives. Because they were probably killed by other black people. Or by men, mostly because of gangs and drugs. They have conceded gangs and drugs. And the reason why the Democrat Party and the Democrat cities concede the gangs and drugs is because the gangs provide blocks of votes for them. And it's been suggested that one of the reasons why the police felt so free to do what they did is they knew that the community would back them as long as the union provides the votes for the Democrat mayor. And just a reminder, and I know I mentioned this last week, but it's worth repeating. The last time New York, where there were riots, New York State voted for a Republican mayor. I mean, a Republican governor, presidential candidate, I should say. Last time New York State voted for a Republican presidential candidate. The last time Minnesota voted for a Republican presidential candidate. And the last time Minneapolis had a Republican mayor, I looked like this. So that's an interesting question concerning systemic racism, and we're going to get into that a little later. But let me repeat that third law of media outrage. The mainstream media's elevation and continued classification of any story as nationally newsworthy, rather than only of local interest, is in direct correlation to said story's current ability to affirm any current Democrat liberal media meme or talking point, particularly on the subject of race or sexuality. Now, in an election where the Democrat media and left is afraid that the black community is not energized, and they are afraid of this. This is all about energizing the black community. The George Floyd case was a golden opportunity for the media to inject race into the campaign in the hopes that black voters would respond, associating the police and authority with the GOP in general and Donald Trump in particular as people of law and order, because obviously Democrats don't believe in law and order. And obviously, in the minds of Democrats, blacks don't believe in law and order. Blacks do, according to them, think about this. According to this, Democrats do not think black people want the laws obeyed. This is why George Floyd's case was national news. But the murder of Ronald Lewis was not national news. The murder of Devin King was not national news. The murder of Justin Snipe was not national news. The murder of Troy Shelton was not national news. The murder of Brandon Brown, not worthy to be made a national story. The murder of Trebre Nix, not worth national. You don't need national coverage for that. The murder of Anthony Robinson, nah, that murder isn't national news. The murder of Gerard Gibson, not national news at all. The murder of Jaquan Burke, that's not a national story. The murder of Donnie Hill, not a national story. The murder of Alex Wilson, not a national story. None of these murders of black men were national stories because they did not advance a talking point. Oh, and by the way, none of those men who were murdered were gonna have a funeral that people could attend. None of them would be couldn't have the funeral. Coronavirus. George Floyd, we can have that funeral. We can have thousands attend. We can have 1 million people go to Washington. Even though coronavirus could be a problem. Apparently, those black lives don't matter. Apparently not. Now, make no mistake, the only reason why parts of Minneapolis were torched and Macy's is looted, and the College Football Hall of Fame is gone, is because the Democrat media left wanted a talking point to motivate their base for election 2020. That's what it's about. They're afraid of the walkaway movement. That's what it's about. And that's the Tech Guy's third law of media outrage. But other laws of the Tech Guys of media outrage apply too. Let's go to the Tech Guy's second law of media outrage. The level of acceptance of the positions and or actions of any group or organization by the left in media is directly proportional to their current or potential value in electing liberal Democrats. And you can see a great example of this here in what's happened. The media did all they could to justify the riots at the start. They portrayed them as, it's a valid response to the death of George Floyd. They needed that to be the case. They also needed to not offend their black base as images of black citizens was looting appeared. And they wanted to not offend the members of Antifa, the violent thugs who have been imported, whose as an organization were imported from Europe and are now functioning. And by the way, there's a great expose. If you haven't seen it already, I'm presuming if you're watching this podcast, you've probably seen it. James O'Keefe at Project Veritas has done it again. There's a spectacular expose of Antifa. I mean, that you gotta watch it. If you haven't watched it, watch it now. You ought to watch it now. It's great. And gonna give me 1 second. I'm gonna tweet out another link to see if we can get a few more eyeballs. So we're going to now talking why the media is complicit. Is to blame for the riots 2000 on the live podcast now. The link that they can go to. Okay, let's see if we can get a few more eyeballs from that. Okay. So the media did their best to make that argument that this was not a big deal. However, it became apparent very quickly that the riots were becoming counterproductive in terms of generating votes for Democrats. And a great example, and I mentioned it on my last podcast, is a relative who lives in Minneapolis who's a big Never Trump guy, who after what happened said bluntly, I will wear a mask and climb over broken glass to vote for Trump next time, because the mayor and the governor of Minnesota had not bothered to move until Trump prompted them. As soon as it became apparent that the riots were becoming counterproductive to Democrats, suddenly there was a distance from them. Suddenly things had to be peaceful. And actually, that's why I think they had Obama come out and talk, because they couldn't have the riots stop because Trump was being forceful, encouraging the use of the National Guard. It had to be because, Obama calmed them down. Obama made them stop. If only Trump was like Obama. Now, I'm hoping the black community doesn't fall for that. But frankly, for the past 40 years, the black community has played Charlie Brown to the media and to black leaders, Lucy, for 40 years. Why they've done so, I can't say. And I'm going to have more to say about that later. But they've done so. The black community has let themselves be taken by the left, which is pretty sad. But again, that's the Tech Guy's third law of media outrage, and I'll repeat that, the second law of media outrage, which states the level of acceptance of the positions and or actions of any group or organization by the left in media is directly proportional to their current or potential value in electing liberal Democrats. But that's not the only law of media outrage that applies. The fourth law applies too. The Tech Guy's fourth law of media outrage states that the degree of media exposure of the corruption or illegality committed by any individual or organization under investigation is directly proportional to its distance from the media's ideology. As soon as it became apparent that Donald Trump started going after Antifa, as soon as the Attorney General started talking about Antifa, the media rushed to defend them on air in articles. The violence they had previously committed, particularly in the Northwest, was a non-story to the national media. It wasn't worth discussing. It wasn't worth critiquing. It was minimized. Antifa, this stuff was being overblown. It needed to be covered up because Antifa is the armed wing of the Democrat Party. These thugs are the armed wing of the Democrat Party. So the corruption, the things they did, the violence they committed could not be exposed by the media, because the degree of media exposure of the corruption or illegality committed by any individual or organization under investigation is directly proportional to its distance from the media's ideology. Finally, the tech guy's first law of media outrage, and I kept this one last. And I did that on purpose because it, in my opinion, was the least one in play here. And that law states that the level of outrage or interest of the media and their allies on the left concerning any insult or prevarication concerning a person or thing will routinely be equal to the inverse of the degree of political distance between said media leftists and the target of said insult prevarication at the time it was made. For example, if Donald Trump is attacking rioting and looting, the media spins him as a person trying to suppress peaceful protest because the media left and against him. They are outraged. But if any Democrat leader or black leader suggests that riots and looting are wrong, like the mayor of Atlanta, he or she is being considered to be trying to bring peace to a volatile situation. They're trying to understand. They're trying to be sympathetic. Now, again, I mentioned my town. I live in a city called Fitchburg, Massachusetts. I'm about 1,000 miles from Minneapolis or so. Now, this week there were going to be protests. There was supposed to be, from what I heard, too. Now it seems it looks like there was only going to be the one that happened Wednesday. There was supposed to be something that might happen tonight. I had heard rumors about it, and it worried me a lot because I'm less than a mile from where the march was going to be. And if there was a riot, I wasn't going to be here. And my thought is, if there were anything, and my thought was very much, I was very worried because I had to work at that time too. I couldn't afford to take the day off. And I tell you, if something had happened to my house, to my sons, to my wife, I wouldn't have forgotten who instigated these riots. And you don't want a Sicilian not forgetting that. In fact, I had a friend who lived even closer to the riots, who still does. And I told her bluntly, because she was getting out of work as I was going in as the time things were about to start. I told her if she had to flee, feel free to flee to my home, because you have to have a plan. And next week I'll be putting out my riot plan, the one I followed, and so forth. Now, the thing that makes me laugh about this, and let me tell you, I want to read you this little tidbit. This comes from the story that our local paper, the Sentinel Enterprise, which is no longer locally owned, by the way. They talked about the scheduled Fitchburg protests. Now, this was written before the protests here took place, but after New York was looted, after Minneapolis burned, and so forth. Listen to this. And by the way, I should point out, this was not written by an AP writer. This was written by a Sentinel Enterprise writer. Quote, since Floyd's death, protests, some of which have been described as violent or destructive by officials, have taken place daily in cities across the country. Some of which have been described as violent. The guy cannot come out and say some have been violent, some have been arson, or some have been destructive. I mean, given that we had the image of an MSN person insisting how peaceful the riots were while buildings were burning behind him, this should not surprise me. But remember, this is 1,000 miles away in a local paper. This writer must have national ambitions. On Sunday, and now I like this one's even better. On Sunday, peaceful protests were carried out in Boston throughout the day until the demonstrations turned violent in the evening, with reports of fires being set and looting. Boston police later released a list of 53 people who were arrested after violence began. In other words, it was peaceful until it wasn't peaceful. The play at Ford's Theater was lovely until someone got shot. In Worcester, many thousands of people demonstrated peacefully during the day to protest George Floyd's killing. However, things took a downward turn at night when some demonstrators threw rocks at police and riot gear and used tear gas to suppress the crowd. Again, this is a local writer, not an AP person, not the big media. Normally, the local media, you get a little more sanity. But we didn't get it. They were actually selling this pablum. And I think it's incredible that they were selling this pablum and expecting us to believe it. And I tell you, I had my son sick for a month, and I was very worried about it. He ran a temperature of over 100 for 3 weeks. Wasn't sure if he was going to live and die for a while. It looked like meningitis. I was really worried. And now, for this week, I had to worry about whether or not my family would be in the middle of riots. I was very concerned, and I want to give a little bit of a thumbs up here to Charlie Baker, who I haven't had a lot of good to say about in general. Because what I found out later was that about a mile from where the people were marching, maybe equidistant from the start of where the march is and here, where I am, there were between 50 to 100 to 200 National Guardsmen, fully armed, ready to go. They weren't where the riots were. The protests. There wasn't any riots in Pittsburgh. They weren't where the protests were, but they were close enough so that if something went wrong in a truck, be there in 2 minutes. And you would have literally would have blocked off the areas to where my house was. But I didn't know that. I think the marches may have. I think the leaders of the marches may have known it. It's like that old line from the pilot for Yes, Prime Minister. I can't give my support to public. Well, it doesn't have to be public so long as everybody knows. As long as everybody knew that they were armed National Guardsmen ready to take a stand, that's good enough. It's one of the reasons why there was no trouble. But so when I got out of work that day, and I literally had gone to my boss when I went in and I told my sons, listen, if something goes on, I want you to call me and then get out of there. And my plan was to come back to the house and find out which direction these people were coming from. And I'd already talked to a local businessman who was nearby. The idea was to defend, at least if I could. If it became impossible, then I would have bugged out. And because there's a bridge near where I live, there was a defensible spot. I was actually looking at land on Monday and Tuesday wondering, okay, is this area defensible? Is this area defensible? If they come this way, what do I do? If they come that way, what do I do? That was my week. Didn't enjoy it. But it made me think of my friend Hannah, who during my interviews with immigrants series, which you can find on YouTube, you really should watch them. It's some of my best work. She's from Iraq, and she described living like that. And I didn't enjoy it. But this gets me to my third point. Now, I mentioned a guy named William Bainbridge. Now, William Bainbridge was one of the commanders of the USS Constitution, but before that, he commanded a ship in 1800 called the USS George Washington. At the time, the United States was a fairly new country. And because it was no longer under English protection, the bribes that the British were paying to the Barbary pirates, which were basically Arab corsairs and pirate kingdoms. Think of little ISISes who would raid ships, take the stuff off them, and enslave the captives on them and sell them for ransom. Professional kidnappers. That slavery, by the way, isn't worth mentioning because obviously it didn't involve black slavery. For some reason, those lives didn't matter, as we discussed earlier. Well, at the time, the United States, eventually they decided to fight these guys. But before they made that decision, they paid tribute. So Captain Bainbridge went over to Algiers to drop off the tribute. And the Dey of Algiers said, I want you to bring this menagerie to this other Barbary pirate at a location. And Bainbridge says, this is the U.S. Why? We're not going to do that. And the Dey of Algiers quite reasonably said to him, you pay me tribute by which you become my slaves. I therefore have a right to order you as I think proper. In other words, you're paying me, you're my slave. So I have a right to order my slaves around. Now, when I got out of work that night, I'd called my house earlier and I had said, listen, if there's no trouble, don't call. But if there's a trouble, call work. And we're going to call the guard desk. I got permission from my boss to leave if there was trouble. Because there are people there who lived in Fitchburg. They all knew what the score was. Because nobody knew what was going to happen. I had gone to local businesses, and businesses were nervous. There's one business that in particular was nervous because they were a tire business. And they were literally right on the route of the march, where the march was going to go. And every couple of weeks, they get a load of tires that have to be trucked out, used tires, old tires that get trucked away. And the truck to take away the tires hadn't shown up 2 hours before the protest. So if that protest had gone on and had gotten out of hand, those tires would have gone up. And if those tires would have gone up, that business would have gone up. And if that business went up, then there would have been businesses in Fitchburg going up. Now, granted, Fitchburg doesn't have much worth looting. We're not what we were when I was a kid. When I was the age in this picture, we had a ton of businesses downtown. We had restaurants downtown. We had Woolworths. We had department stores. We got nothing. We got a couple of pizza places. We got a couple of banks. We got one jeweler. We got a couple of barbershops. That's pretty much it. There's very little, if anything, worth looting in Fitchburg. Well, anyway, so I decided to drive down. I got out of work at midnight, and I drive this. I get home. I see that there's no sign of any trouble. I'm very happy by that. You can't imagine the relief. And remember, my nephew's neighborhood in Minneapolis got torched. He and his wife-to-be and the kid got out of there. So then there were people taunting me online saying, yeah, you're big afraid of a peaceful protest. Well, yeah, when your nephew's neighborhood gets burnt out, tell me about how I shouldn't be worried. I'm sure that nobody thought his neighborhood had anything to worry about either. So yeah, I was worried. I was prepared. I had a plan of action. I had a plan of action for my family. I had a plan of action to defend my house. I had a plan of action. I had a planned area of place to retreat, and I had a planned place to retreat where there were sufficient weapons to hold out. Yes, I took the time to do that. And you want to tease me about it, you go ahead. But that's my wife, my kids, my house. And I'm still the father. It's my responsibility to worry about it. So anyways, I drive back. I come home. And I pass by and I say, I'm going to drive down Main Street to take a look. No problem. Nothing broken. No things. And none of them. So obviously everything had been peaceful, which was great. But I noticed a sign in front of Espresso's Pizza. For those of you, and there might be somebody listening who knows Fitchburg at all, Espresso's Pizza has been there since I was 2 years old. It's a Fitchburg landmark, and it's run by a Spanish gentleman, and he has his teenage sons there, just preteen, maybe preteen, who work there. I did a great thing. I did a video series called American Success Stories. You can find the video of him there. It's a great story. He works hard. Their sons are going to be successful because they work hard, and they've learned to work hard young. It's a great story. Well, I noticed there were some signs on the doors there. So I looped around the common, and I pulled into the parking lot. Now, by the way, you can see the current Fitchburg City Hall. The main City Hall is the old City Hall is being rebuilt, restored, I should say. But where the current City Hall is, there were a line of police cars. So somebody couldn't go. If someone wanted to throw like a Molotov cocktail at night at City Hall post-protest, because the protest was ended during the day, the police were there ready to stop. And there were police strategically placed. Because I looked around. I made it a point to drive around, which probably got people wondering, all right, check this guy's plate, find out who he is. Because I was driving around and I was observing everything. Well, I park at Espresso's parking lot, and I get out and I notice all over the plane, there are Black Lives Matter signs. Black Lives Matter. Justice for Floyd. Black Lives Matter. Now, those weren't there 2 days ago. And they were all on the inside, so they were put by the Espresso's people. And my first thought was, this is insurance. Now, the people there may or may not believe in that, but they were right along the line of march. That was insurance. In my mind, that was cheap insurance to keep their windows from being busted. To make sure that their windows were not busted, they made it very clear which side they were on. Here, well, I'm going to pay tribute to Black Lives Matter so that my windows aren't busted. And when I went by there yesterday, most of the signs were down, but there were still a couple of black fists like this. And maybe the next time I go in, once I'm allowed to go in again, I'm going to ask if my life matters. I mean, I've been going there since I was 10 years old. Well, a little older. And I'm going to ask them if my life matters. I'm not black, not even slightly black. I'm Sicilian, although, frankly, everybody went to Sicily. So I might be part black way thousands of years back. Who knows? But I'm going to ask them if my life matters. And if it doesn't, I mean, I like Espresso's pizza, but not that much. Not enough to sell myself. And I'm not gonna bust them for making that decision. I then drove by Domino's. Now, Domino's is normally open till 2 a.m, so every now and then I will pick up a pizza late at Domino's if I don't get a chance to eat. I noticed they were closed. And I figured, well, they must have closed preemptively because they didn't want to take any chances. So I pull in the parking lot to take a look, and they have a big sign on their door saying, our store is closed so that our employees can go out and show that Black Lives Matter. So maybe the next time I order from Domino's, I'll ask if my life matters, if my wife and kids' lives matter. You can't say all lives matter now. Now think about that. If the people in Espressos are primarily Hispanic, if they had said all lives matter, because Hispanic lives, don't the lives of him and his kids matter? They might have gotten a brick through their window. I would have rather had the brick, because I'm a Roman Catholic. In fact, and for those of you who don't know, I host a Catholic radio show every Saturday on WQPH 89.3 FM terrestrial radio. I record it on Wednesdays. It's played on Saturdays. It'll be on tomorrow. And I talk a little bit about this matter in terms of Ezekiel, chapter of Ezekiel. You can catch that tomorrow at noon Eastern time on WQPH radio. Their website is wqphradio.org. But I talk about how the people should only be blamed for their own things. If they had put all lives matter on their windows, might have had a brick through it. Now, I understand the business. They don't want to brick through their window. They don't want to risk somebody there. They don't want to risk that when the police are gone and the National Guard is gone and no one's around, someone doesn't cold cock them and say, well, they had it coming. I can't do that. When there were people in front of my house with guns, 3 black people, actually, several years ago. I don't remember the year. I went outside with my camera. I didn't go out the front door because I didn't want to spook and get shot, but I was outside with my camera filming. That film ended up being used in the arrest and the trial. And I was there to testify. I testified before the grand jury, my wife and I, and we were there to testify on the day of the trial when they plea bargained out. And they had a friggin' arsenal down the street, 6 doors from my house. Now, I could have stayed safe in my house. But once you decide to surrender to that, you're surrendering always. This is my house. I'm not going to live like that. Yeah, I'm only 57. I probably have another 19 years left in me. My dad died at 66. I'm not a drinker or smoker, though I'm heavy like he is. But I'm not a drinker and smoker, so I've given myself 10 years more. But a man's got to die of something, and you don't give in. I'm not going to say what Black Lives Matter demands I say. I'm not going to refuse. A basic thing of Christianity is all lives matter. And the reason why all lives matter, all humans are vital and are worthwhile, is because, as Christianity teaches, they are all created in God's image and equal before God, which is why they're equal before the law. In fact, for those of you who don't know, it's Christianity's that idea that led William Wilberforce to successfully ban slavery in England, which caused the British Navy, by the way, to start giving out head money. You might have heard of what's called prize money. During the Napoleonic Wars, you captured an enemy ship. That ship was worth, and when it was sold, the crew got money for it, and the admirals above it and so forth. Well, they used to have something called head money. If you were a British Navy ship and you caught a slaver, you got so many pounds. I think the ship's crew captain and the admiral in this section got 5 pounds sterling for every slave freed. The crew got a percentage that was split. The officers got a percentage that was split, and the captains got a percentage that was split. And the black Africans who were selling other black Africans did not like this. They liked the slave trade. In fact, one of the greatest ironies of all of this, that has happened, is that while the black community's leaders rail about racism in America and how horrible it is, the descendants of black slaves who were cruelly sold and robbed of their culture and stripped of their heritage and sold in North and South America, those descendants of black slaves are looked on with envy by the descendants of those who sold them, who would give anything to be living in the United States as an American citizen rather than back in Africa. Now, personally, I think that having your ancestors enslaved cruelly is not worth the price. Myself, I would not. If I had to say, you can live in the safest, most prosperous country in the world, all you have to do is have your ancestors enslaved, I wouldn't have gone for it myself, because I wouldn't have wanted that to happen to my ancestors. But I think that's the greatest revenge of the descendants of slaves on the people in Africa who sold them to the people to the slaving ships that came over, is the fact that they're American citizens. They have citizenship rights here in America that others dream of, that others come over and hope to be able to get in to get. But there's more than that. Until COVID hit, you had freedom of movement, and people voted with their feet to come into the U.S. And despite our Democrat friends saying, America is so racist, so terrible, it's horrible. Compared to what? Compared to where? Nobody asks that question. It is so racist and so horrible that literally millions of people rush to try and get here, that people try and rush the border, that they seek asylum. Where I work, there are maybe 4 on my shift. There's like maybe 100 people. There's 4 white people who were born here. 1, 2, 3. I count 4. 1 manager, 3 people on the line, and 1 or 2 people who are of mixed race. Most are of Hispanic origin, and I don't like the word Hispanic either, because a person from Puerto Rico is not the same as a Dominican, who is not the same as a Mexican, who is not the same as a Colombian, who is not the same as a Venezuelan, who is not the same as a Guatemalan, who is not the same as an Ecuadorian. When you say Hispanic, you're actually depriving people of their heritage, in my opinion. But that's as it may be. But there's Haitians there. In fact, again, I have an interview with a Haitian there who we've been debating about these situations. There are people from Cape Verde, which is a set of islands off of Africa. There are people from Cameroon, people from Santo Domingo. All these people, they came to America, and they willingly come here. Now, as I said, my ancestors came from Sicily. And if Sicily was all that, they would have stayed. They didn't. They came here. Which must tell you that America is better than where they were for them. Now, do we see it? And let's go a little further. Do we see a mass exodus of Black Americans off to someplace else, off to where they will get more justice? No. Because they realize what they have. I was listening to sports radio on the way back. There's a YouTube sports guy who got a job on CBS radio. I can't remember his name. And he was talking about how he's a black man. He was talking about how he was in Hong Kong and they wouldn't serve him. And the guy said, "You're not in America. I don't have to serve you." And now think about that. Think about that for a second. Again, if you want to say America is not as good as heaven, I will agree. If you want to say America is not as good as it could be, I'll agree there too. Nothing on earth is as good as it could be. But don't tell me how racist America is. When you're not comparing it to what? Comparing it to where? Where would a Black American rather have citizenship and live? And one more thing about Black American, I don't remember if I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again if I haven't. My mother used to tell me this story, and this is a story that got her in big trouble with her in-laws. She always didn't get along. Her and the in-laws on my father's side, the women, they didn't get along. She was visiting her father-in-law one day. He was an old Sicilian. He was born in the 1880s. And the subject came up that he wasn't collecting Social Security. And my mother asked, "Well, why aren't you collecting Social Security?" He said, "Well, I own land." And she's like, "What?" "Well, I own land, and you can't collect Social Security. if you own land. And she's over there. Who told you that? And an Italian leader, a Sicilian, who was very well respected by the community, had told that. And he had so kindly offered to let him sign his land over to him so he could collect Social Security. And my grandfather thought about it and said, I'd just as soon hold on to my land. I would just as soon not have my land be signed away. No offense intended. And the guy, oh, no problem. And my mother said to him, that's not the case. And boy, my aunts tore into her. You know better than so-and-so. He's a leader of the community. And mom says, Pa, let me take care of it. I'll get you Social Security. So she had to write to Italy for his information and so forth. And there's a slightly funny story concerning that, in that the first time she wrote, they said, we're sorry, all the records were destroyed in the earthquake because they lived near Mount Etna. So she sent it a second time with a $5 bill inside, and miraculously all the records turned up. But he ended up getting his first Social Security check without signing over his land. And he tore into his daughters, saying that they were all idiots and my mother was smart. And boy, that all my lifetime they did not get along. That was a grudge, let me tell you. The happy ending to the story in the long run. The grandfather, the reason why I don't say what the family is who did this, was the grandson of the man who may or may not know what his grandfather did. Big philanthropist. And he always has wealth and uses it for good. People need help. People need things. Always helping people with it. Constantly doing good works with that wealth that he has. Now, I don't know if he's trying to make up for his grandfather or not, or if he's just that way, which just goes to show that God works in mysterious ways. But more important than that, the example I'm saying is, there was Italian Americans. My grandfather was illiterate. He came from Sicily. He didn't know. And so Italians who did know took advantage of him, promising, I will take care of you. Just give me your land. This is what the Black community has done. Their leaders have done to the Black community. And this has happened with the Irish. This has happened with the French. This has happened with every community that's come here. The difference is, eventually, those communities became Americanized. And that didn't matter anymore. Can someone explain to me why this remains the case with the Black community? Why they let themselves be played by the Democrat Party? Why they let themselves be played by Black leaders? I don't know why. I can't explain it. And maybe it's cultural. Maybe I don't know. Maybe for the same reason that Black Americans celebrated when O.J. Simpson was found innocent. They probably knew he was guilty. But they had beaten the system. It was their victory in their mind. Maybe it's a cultural thing. I don't know. But until the Black community decides this is going to continue until the Black community decides they're not going to do it anymore. Because seriously, who's going to open up a business in Minneapolis? Who's going to, you couldn't pay me to open a retail store there. I wouldn't take the risk. I wouldn't, not until the mafia moves in and sells protection, as I was mentioning earlier. But I wouldn't do it. Who's going to do it? And who has suffered from this? Who is going to suffer but the Black lives in those neighborhoods? But again, you have to pay homage to Black Lives Matter. And I can't escape it. I turn on, I go to Amazon Prime, Black Lives Matter stuff on top. I go to YouTube, Black Lives Matter. Bullshit. Black Lives Matter because they're human lives. What happened to George Floyd is outrageous, not because he's Black, but because it happened to him and it's a crime. The solution to all this is very simple, by the way. Enforce the laws on the police, enforce the laws on everyone else. If the law is enforced, it's not a problem. You violate that law, you're in trouble. That's the solution, to just enforce the laws. But that solution does not generate Democrat votes, does not generate the anger, does not generate what they are hoping for to win an election. And their hope isn't much very good right now with the economy bouncing back and the new job numbers, which I'm going to wait till another day to talk about in any detail. But this is what is being played. This entire thing is a grift. Now, that does not mean that the various people who are marching are all part of the grift. I'm sure there are quite a few people, maybe even the majority, involved in this stuff who are sincere as hell, who mean the best. They want justice, and they should get justice. There's a reason why justice has a blindfold. It's supposed to be colorblind. And the police officers, if found guilty, should be punished to the full extent of the law. Just like they found probable cause to charge them, they should be charged. Now, I noticed one thing. Keith Ellison has elevated the charge from 3rd to 2nd degree murder, and while that will get a few people smiling, it's going to be a harder thing to prove because there's premeditation involved, intent to kill. And I actually believe, and it's a really sad thing to say, but I actually believe that he's hoping for an acquittal so you can have this go on again. I think that's the goal. And at Innocent Pundit, Ed Driscoll asks, is Black Lives Matter a religion for woke white people? And my answer is yes. Because once you stop believing in God, you believe in anything. I mean, that's the bottom line here. I believe that what happened to George Floyd is wrong because it was wrong. Not because of his race, because it's wrong. But I'm not going to blame my local police officer for it. I'm not going to hold all police responsible for that. And you shouldn't either. Now, Drew Brees, for example, who made a groveling apology for defending the flag. Now, if they can do that to Drew Brees, they can do it to anybody. And that was the whole point, to say, we can break you. You are my slaves, and I can order around my slaves as I see fit. That's the whole point. I think this isn't going to work out. And just to quote Matt Walsh, George Floyd's funeral is expected to have hundreds of thousands of attendees, including high-profile politicians like Biden. Meanwhile, people have not been allowed to go to their own family members' funerals because attendance was capped due to COVID-19. So if you had to stay home while your grandmother was buried, take heart. At least funerals are still safe if they happen to be convenient political spectacles for Democrats. That's paying homage. That's being a slave. That's submitting. I refuse to submit. Are there some dangers? Yeah, there's some dangers. Maybe less because I'm Sicilian, but there's still dangers. Am I looking forward to the risks involved? No. I'd rather not worry about it. But what price is your self-respect worth? What price is an American self-respect and an American's freedom worth? Now, remember, everyone has to make that decision for themselves. Everyone has to make that decision for themselves, and I am not going to I am going to try not to judge people who make a different decision. I'm going to be surprised that they make that decision. I'm going to be disappointed that Americans will make that decision. But it's for each individual's decision to be made. And you have to have the right to make that decision based on your own family and so forth. And it's like my 12 steps or 13 steps for disaster preparedness in case you have to flee or fight. At the end, I put at the end of my 12 points, and that hasn't gone up yet. It's probably going to go up sometime next week. That if you are not either physically or mentally or indispositioned capable of defending your property without crossing a line, then just bug out. Some people are not willing to pay the price because it's too much for them. And it's their life and their price. That's all right. This is America. You have the right to make that decision for yourself. As for me, I will not submit. I will not be quiet. I will not be silent. And if it means trouble for me, it means trouble for me. That's just the way it is. I can't do otherwise. the very first virtue, and C.S. Lewis talked about this, the very first virtue, the virtue that leads every other is courage. Because without courage, you can't practice the other virtues. You're going to fold. And is there some risk? Like I said, there is a risk. But you know what? A man's got to die of something. That's how it is. Well, anyway, that's what I believe. Well, for those of you who stayed with us for the full hour and what's going to be 15 minutes by the time I'm done talking, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to remind you that we will be here again next time, 3 p.m., right after Rush Limbaugh on Friday. The Tech Guy Off DaRadio's No Frills podcast. Just me, my laptop, and a microphone. If you liked what you saw, please give the video a thumbs up and share it with others. And I appreciate the thumbs up that we've gotten for this video. If you really like it, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm still a few hundred subscribers away from being able to monetize the channel. It'd be nice to be able to monetize the channel. That way YouTube can ban me. I don't have enough followers. I don't have enough followers yet to be censored or banned. So maybe I should look for 999 followers and say, don't get more than that. Just share it. And then you can hit my tip jar if you think it's worthwhile. And I'd really appreciate it, because the whole reason why I've done this podcast for the last 2 months, and I've been doing it for 2 months, for those of you who just discovered me, is that I was looking to increase the hits on the blog and to raise about an extra $180 a month. You know, $40, $50 a week from the tip jar. So if you really like what you saw, please consider hitting the tip jar. Last month, we made our goal. Really appreciated. This month, hopefully, we'll do it. If we make it, great. If not, I'll still be here doing the podcast, because, you walk before you run. We had a very big audience last week, but it took place during the riots. I don't know how big the audience is overall. I'll look at the stats when we're done. But for all of you who came here, appreciate you coming, whether you liked what I had to say or didn't. If you liked what I had to say, I appreciate it. If you didn't like what I had to say and you stuck with me to hear me out, you have the right to your opinion. I appreciate you at least hearing me out. I have the right to be wrong in your eyes, and you have the right to be wrong in mine. That's okay. But either way, and I also want to especially thank InstaPundit, who's been Insta-lancing me a lot. If that Insta-lance had come an hour earlier, I would have been prepared. Literally, we got Insta-lance 10 minutes before the podcast, which meant I had to do a lot of things. But I especially want to thank those of you who've been coming to the site lately, because I tell you, the traffic over the last month has really gone up. I've seen a real increase in monthly traffic. And it's because of guys like you who've stopped by. And don't forget, I'm not the only person at the Tech Guy blog. I have paid writers here, my Magnificent 7 writers. Again, I'm not at the traffic I used to be years ago when I was doing on-the-field reporting, questioning Donald Trump at news conferences and so forth. But we're getting back to where I once was. Maybe this year will look pretty decent. We'll see. But anyways, thanks for spending an hour and 15 with me. Check out my writers from Baldy Locks on down. If you're in California, do what you can to get rid of that SB 12, because I'm running out of posts that Baldy Locks can do. She's not writing as much for me because she's limited. But until then, the Tech Guys No Frill podcast, a subset of the Tech Guys Midnight Court, which is what the podcast used to be, is now adjourned. Thank you again. We'll see you next week. Stay well.